On February 28, 2026, the skies over the Middle East went dark. In under 6 hours, 7 countries shut their airspace completely. Commercial aircraft performed emergency U-turns over open ocean, and a massive continuous barrier opened up across the center of global aviation. It was the largest airspace closure the world had ever seen, and it exposed a vulnerability that the entire airline industry had been quietly ignoring for decades. The Middle East is not just another region on the flight map, it is the single most important piece of sky in commercial aviation. Every day, thousands of long-haul flights pass through this corridor, carrying passengers between Europe, India, Southeast Asia, Australia, and East Africa. For airlines, it is the shortest, most fuel-efficient bridge between the western and eastern halves of the planet. When that bridge suddenly disappeared, the consequences were immediate, global, and far more severe than anyone had planned for. But to understand why the damage was so catastrophic, you need to understand exactly how quickly the collapse unfolded, and why no contingency plan on Earth was designed to handle it. The crisis began in the early hours of February 28th. Joint US and Israeli strikes hit Iranian military infrastructure in an operation the Pentagon called Epic Fury. Within minutes, Iran and Israel both shut their flight information regions, instantly severing one of the most heavily trafficked aviation corridors on Earth. But the closures did not stop there. By mid-morning, Iraq had suspended civilian overflights, removing a primary route used by hundreds of long-haul aircraft traveling between Europe and the Persian Gulf. Then Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait closed entirely. The United Arab Emirates introduced partial restrictions, and Dubai International Airport, the busiest international hub on Earth, temporarily halted all arrivals and departures. Over the following days, the disruption continued to spread. By March 2nd, Jordan had officially closed its airspace, and Lebanon had severely restricted operations. Within those first critical days, the entire region had effectively sealed itself off from the global aviation network, and then Iran launched its response. Operation True Promise 4 was a retaliatory counter-offensive involving waves of drones and ballistic missiles targeting US military bases and critical infrastructure in Bahrain and the UAE. Explosions were reported near Dubai. Shrapnel from intercepted projectiles forced airport closures to extend indefinitely. And the airspace restrictions that had started as temporary military precautions hardened into something far more permanent. Because when we plot every closure on a single map, they do not form isolated no-fly zones. They form a continuous wall, stretching from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to the Persian Gulf, completely blocking the corridor that connects Europe to Asia. Aviation experts described it as a collapsed bridge, and when the bridge collapsed, the traffic did not disappear. It funneled into 2 narrow corridors, one swinging far to the north through Central Asia, the other bending south across Saudi Arabia and the Arabian Sea. Both options added hours to already long flights. But here is where the real damage began. Saudi Arabia and Oman were the only countries that kept their airspace open. That meant every rerouted flight between Europe and Asia, every diverted aircraft, every emergency evacuation service, all had to squeeze through 2 narrow strips of sky that were never designed to handle that volume. Air traffic control in the Saudi corridor hit unprecedented saturation. Departure airports in India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka reported ground delays of 3 to 5 hours simply because there was no room in the sky to accept more aircraft. Flights that normally took 6 hours were stretching to 10 or 11, and for many routes, the maths simply stopped working. Aircraft have strict limits on fuel, payload, and crew duty time. Push those limits too far, and the flight becomes physically impossible to operate. So instead of rerouting, airlines started cancelling. Emirates grounded nearly 90% of its flights. Qatar Airways suspended all Gulf-bound services for 6 consecutive days. Its home hub in Doha completely isolated inside the closed Bahrain FIR. Etihad diverted aircraft mid-flight to Muscat to dodge incoming ballistic missiles. Within the first week, over 400,000 passengers were stranded across airports in Europe, South Asia, and East Africa. Airlines were hemorrhaging money. Emirates alone lost an estimated $600 million in revenue in 7 days. Every rerouted long-haul flight burned an additional $8,000 to $15,000 in fuel. And carriers that could not reroute at all simply watched their revenue evaporate while fixed costs, aircraft leases, crew salaries, and maintenance schedules continued to pile up. But the financial carnage was only the surface layer of this crisis, because beneath the chaos of cancelled flights and stranded passengers, something far more structural was breaking down, and it will reshape how the world flies for decades to come. The global aviation network was not designed to lose the Middle East. For over 40 years, airlines have built their route maps, their fleet strategies, and their entire business models around the assumption that this corridor would always be open. The Flight Information Region System, the framework that divides the world's sky into manageable blocks, was designed in an era when the idea of 7 adjacent countries simultaneously closing their airspace was almost unthinkable. There was no backup architecture, no redundant routing layer, no automated system to redistribute thousands of flights when the center of the map suddenly disappears, and the crisis revealed just how thin the margins really are. GPS spoofing, already a growing problem in the region, escalated significantly during the conflict. Aircraft navigation systems were being deliberately interfered with, and the European Union Aviation Safety Agency extended formal warnings advising airlines to avoid the region entirely. This was not turbulence. This was electronic warfare bleeding directly into civilian airspace. The two surviving corridors, Saudi Arabia to the south and Central Asia to the north, absorbed the overflow, but they were never built for it. The northern route adds roughly 90 minutes to a typical Europe to Asia flight. The southern route can add even more, and both corridors pass through airspace controlled by countries with their own political complexities. Turkey, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, and Pakistan all saw dramatic spikes in overflight traffic, straining their air traffic control systems and raising new questions about whether these alternative routes can function as permanent replacements. Because that is the question the industry is now being forced to answer. What if this is not a temporary disruption? What if the Middle East corridor never returns to what it was? Even after the initial fighting stabilized in early March, the reopening was fragile and partial. Emirates and Etihad resumed limited operations, but only via polar and African routing that added 4 to 6 hours per flight. Qatar Airways managed special evacuation flights out of Doha by March 7th, but its hub remained operationally crippled. And every resumption came with an asterisk, subject to immediate cancellation if military activity escalates. The financial markets reflected the new reality. Credit rating agencies like S&P warned of potential downgrades as Brent crude soared past $90 a barrel, and war risk insurance premiums for Gulf-bound flights surged overnight. For airlines already bleeding cash from cancellations and reroutes, the spiraling costs added another layer of pressure that will not disappear when the missiles stop. And this is where the long-term shift becomes visible. Airlines are not just waiting for the skies to reopen, they are fundamentally re-evaluating whether the Middle Eastern bridge can ever be trusted the same way again. The 2022 Ukraine conflict had already forced carriers to abandon Russian airspace, pushing traffic south into the Middle East corridor. Now that corridor itself has proven fragile. The aviation industry has effectively lost 2 of its most critical routing arteries in the space of 4 years. The response is already taking shape. Aircraft manufacturers report surging demand for ultra-long-range jets, planes capable of connecting Europe to Asia directly across the Atlantic or over the Arctic, bypassing the Middle East entirely. Airlines are studying polar routes that were once considered exotic contingency plans. And the Gulf carriers themselves, the ones whose entire empires were built on geographic centrality, are quietly ordering smaller, longer-range aircraft that can connect city pairs directly without funneling everything through a single mega-hub. The Middle East will remain important to aviation, its airports will reopen, its airlines will recover, but the assumption that sustained, uninterrupted access to this airspace is guaranteed, that assumption is gone. And once an industry as risk-averse as commercial aviation loses confidence in a corridor, the changes it makes tend to be permanent. New routes get certified, new fleet orders get placed, new insurance frameworks get written. the sky does not snap back to the way it was. It reshapes itself around the scar. A continuous wall of closed airspace formed across the center of global aviation in a single morning. The flights will eventually return, but the map of global aviation, the invisible architecture that determines how every passenger moves between continents, that map has already been redrawn, and the Middle East will never sit at the center of it quite the same way again. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe for more stories like this.